Hello and welcome to my review of Labyrinth Legend. This review is specifically for the upcoming Nintendo Switch version of the game, but it has been available on PC, iOS and Android for about a year at this point. Also, I need to let you know that a review code was provided to me by NIS America. So, what's Labyrinth Legend all about? Well, it's a hack-and-slash action RPG and it's presented in a 2D pixel art style. It features procedurally generated dungeons, loads of loot to collect, and unique bosses to defeat. When you first get into the game, you'll be able to create your own character. You can name them, choose how they look from a small selection of options, and then you can pick a class. The three classes in the game are the Strider, the Wizard, and the Nightcrawler. The Nightcrawler class is actually a new addition to this version of the game. The Strider is your standard, all-around warrior type. There's nothing too special to say about this class, but it's a good first choice for a new player. They do, however, have a special ability called Guard, which allows you to block hits in exchange for MP. The Wizard is your typical caster type and uses staves to cast magical attacks. The type of elemental magic produced depends on the staff itself, but you can find some that only produce raw melee damage and don't use MP. Also, this class has a special ability called Focus that completely restores your MP, but you can only activate it when standing still for a few moments. The new class that was added to the Nintendo Switch version of the game is called the Nightcrawler. This class specializes in physical attacks and has a special ability called Awaken. When this ability is activated, it temporarily increases your stats and power. You can also dodge into enemies to damage them, which makes this class very agile and very dangerous at the same time. And just a quick note, you can pick any of the visual appearances for any of the classes. You don't need to play as this Wolfman character to be a Nightcrawler, for example. After you've set up your character, you'll be able to select your difficulty. You can choose from casual, normal or hard, and once you've made your choice, you'll get a very quick tutorial that teaches you the basics of the gameplay. The story and the narrative of the game are pretty simple. It takes place in a kingdom at the edge of the world known as Kanata. Word spread of a royal treasure that was lost in the cursed labyrinth that exists there, but no one knows where these rumors came from. The mystery of the lost treasure brought many adventurers to the kingdom, and you play as one of those adventurers. Once you've been given the setup and you've completed the short tutorial, you'll be teleported into the village, which acts as the main hub area of this game. This is where you'll do most of your upgrading and character setup before jumping into the dungeons. As you explore this area, you'll notice that the townspeople may have something to say to you. If you walk up to them for a chat, they'll give you some small tidbits of information about the world you're in and some of their personal backstory. They generally have more to say each time you clear a dungeon for the first time. Besides the random townspeople, you'll find a selection of vendors who can help you on your quest. There's a weapons shop where you can buy and sell gear, a blacksmith to upgrade your gear, a general store where you can purchase permanent upgrades and skills, and a miner who'll delve into the mines for you for a price. You might also notice this little boat off to the side. Well, that boat takes you to a small monster island where you can house various monsters. In order to find these monsters, you'll need to use the search option on the island itself, which costs a resource called magical ingredients. You won't have the ability to collect that resource until you buy the container from the general store though, so you'll probably have to do at least 1 or 2 dungeon runs beforehand. The search will basically generate a monster for you and you can choose to keep it or dismiss it completely. Each monster has 2 abilities tied to it, and these abilities activate when the monster is taken with you into the dungeons. The monster does not attack enemies for you, and it also can't be hurt. It simply provides a passive bonus when it's with you. These passive bonuses can be upgraded as well. This is due to the fact that the monster you bring along with you will level up as you explore and clear dungeons. At first you can only keep a few monsters, but you can buy the ability to keep more from the general store in town. Located down in the southeast part of town, you'll find a bar. This bar only serves as a gateway to the co-op gameplay and does nothing for the solo player. The main gameplay loop has you doing 2 main things: fighting through dungeons and then going back to town to set up for the next dungeon. When you're ready to head off into a dungeon, you simply move to the bridge located at the north of the town, and this will open up the kingdom's map. From here you just select where you want to go and you'll be near enough instantly dropped into the dungeon. In terms of combat, you'll be using the 4 face buttons for your attacks, the L button for class abilities and dodging, and then the R button for healing potions. You only get 1 class ability, and as far as I can see, it doesn't change, but you can purchase extra potion charges at the general store in the town. The potions aren't really consumable items in the traditional sense. They act more like the Estus flask from Dark Souls. At the start you only have 1 heal, but you can purchase more and they refill after every dungeon. As I previously mentioned, dodging is done with the same button as your class ability. The difference is that for the dodge to activate, you must be moving when pressing the L button. If you want to perform your class ability instead, you simply stand still and press the L button. Your attacks and the buttons you use to execute them are tied to the items you have equipped and where you've placed them. For example, let's say you have a sword and a bow. If you equip the sword into the lower left square on the equipment screen, it'll be tied to the B button on the Nintendo Switch. Then if you equip a bow in the lower right square, that will be tied to the A button on the Switch, and so on. So as you can see, it all depends on what you want to have equipped and where. The upper two squares, which are tied to the Y and X buttons, are for skills related to the weapons you have equipped. If you want to focus on using, let's say, swords for example, then go ahead and buy the sword skill from the general store. Once you own the skill, I believe the game auto-equips it if you equip a sword at the same time, and the same is true for other weapons as well. However, this is not the same for each class. And in case you were wondering, these skills do use up your MP, so if you want to use them often, it's worth building your character towards MP. Another thing to note is that when you attack in this game, you don't need to mash the attack button. You can simply hold the button down like you would in a game like Diablo, for instance. Fans of dungeon crawling games will be happy to know that there is a lot of randomized loot to collect in the dungeons, each with their own stats, bonuses, and rarity. Heavier armor will actually slow you down and reduce your agility stat, but of course you'll be able to soak up more damage. The armor that you equip in the menu does not affect your character's physical appearance, but you will be able to see the different weapons and spells in action as you use them. Progressing through a dungeon is a simple matter of fighting through its standard floors and defeating the boss at the end. In order to move from one floor to the next, you'll need to find and defeat the random enemy with the key icon hovering above them. Once you've done that, you're free to move to the next floor by heading to the door, or you can hang around and clear out literally everything on the current floor. As you might imagine, enemies will drop lots of random gear for you to collect, and there's always a ton of chests littered around the dungeon floors. The enemies themselves come in a wide variety of flavors. Each one attacks and moves in different ways, which means you'll need to adapt to each one if you don't want to be overwhelmed. There's some that throw projectiles, some that simply rush you, and others that can hold you in place, and some that don't do much at all, like the slimes. Once you get to the end of each dungeon, you'll have to defeat a boss to clear it and claim the loot. Each boss is designed and themed after the dungeon it's found in. They have a large health bar and a set pattern of attacks that you can learn to evade. They'll sometimes use some very powerful attacks when they're near death, and usually only once per battle, so do watch out for those. Once you've beaten the boss, they'll drop a chest which you can open and collect the goodies inside. After that, it's back to the town to prepare for the next run. And I think at this point you probably understand what the game's all about and how it all works. So let's go into my own personal opinions on the game, and I'll tell you what I thought of it. When I get to this section of a review, I tend to start off with my main positive point, the thing that stood out to me the most when I played the game. And I think when it comes to Labyrinth Legend, the best selling point is easily its combat. From literally the first, maybe 10 seconds of actual combat, not including the tutorial, I was absolutely hooked by it. I just found the whole thing very fun to play, and I thought this game might be a tiny bit janky or clunky to control, but no, it's really not in my opinion. I mean, look, this is a small indie game, and just due to their nature, they can sometimes be a little bit hit or miss in terms of quality. Having said that, I'm so glad that I applied to review this game because I just couldn't put it down. The gameplay and moment-to-moment combat just feels so snappy, satisfying, and solid. After many hours playing the game, I found out that the developers marketed Labyrinth Legend as a game that gets right into the action while spending minimal downtime, and that is absolutely correct. Going on my experience, I would say you easily spend 80 or maybe 90% of your time in the dungeons in combat, and that's great because it's simply a pleasure to play. Now obviously, just looking at it, you can tell it's not a huge, expensive AAA title, and I don't think it's going to set the world on fire or be the next big thing, but it does have quality and polish where it counts. I know some people aren't too keen on pixel art, and that's fine. As I always say, not everything is for everyone, and that's okay. But I personally do like pixel art. I always have, really, and this game, while not overly detailed, looks very pleasant. It's bright, clean, crisp, and I think the world has a good amount of personality to it. At first I was thinking, these graphics are okay, I guess, but the further I got into the game, the more locations I went to and the more enemies I came up against, the more I appreciated the design work that went into the game. And honestly, the music's great as well. There's a lot of tracks that really suit the areas you're exploring, and actually there's one track that just reminds me of Sonic the Hedgehog on the Mega Drive or Genesis for some reason, and I just really like that. It's actually quite hard to articulate just how much enjoyment I got out of this game, and of course you could play it and completely disagree. In my honest view though, I actually wish there was more of it, as I would happily have played this game for triple the amount of time that I spent on it. Lastly, I just want to mention the Monster Island system briefly. I think it's just a nice little addition to a game like this. Like the rest of the game, it is pretty simplistic, and I don't mean that in a bad way, don't get me wrong, but I do appreciate small little additions. As I've said, the game was made by a small team and it costs under $15 to buy. So when I was playing it, I was looking for thoughtful little things like this system that shows the developers cared about what they were doing. Does the existence of this minor mechanic in the game prove that they really care about what they were creating? No, it doesn't, but it's something that they didn't have to add into the game, but they did, and as I said, I appreciate things like that. I think a lot of lesser studios would have just made it as basic as humanly possible, you know, the minimum viable product kind of thing, but little touches like this Monster Island system tell me that this particular studio has some ambition, and I think that's a good thing. Plus, as far as I can tell, there's not a single piece of DLC or any microtransactions to be found. This developer created a game and sold a game, just as it should be. And with all that said, let's talk about a couple of possible negative points. So, as you can probably tell from the last section, I quite like this game. In fact, considering the price and what you get, I think it's great, but there are a few things to point out. Despite all of the good things I've said, there is a few things that disappointed me. One of those things is the fact that your character's appearance doesn't change with the armor that you equip. I mean, yeah, okay, the swords and weapons do show up when you use them, and there is quite a lot of good effects for spells and abilities, but I would have loved it if your character could actually look different depending on what you've equipped. You know, you start off the game looking really basic, and then towards the end of the game, you look like some sort of awesome knight or something. Or if that wasn't possible, even something like unlockable and equipable skins would have been great. And I think when you couple that with the fact that it's not got a lot of character skins to start with, it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. Again though, it is a small studio and sometimes you need to cut things from the game to keep it on track, so I do kind of understand. Another thing I mentioned earlier was the art style. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with it to me, but I know there's quite a few people out there that won't even look at a pixel art game in 2022. So, you know, if you don't like pixel art, I guess this one isn't going to be for you. I personally really like this game and its art style, but you know, you like what you like, and if pixel art isn't your thing, I'm not going to shame you for that. Lastly, there isn't too much of a narrative or a story to cling to here. I mean, there is some, of course, but the game's main point is to get you into the dungeons and into the action as quickly as possible, so it kind of makes sense. I think the small amount of story that is here is kind of interesting though, and the townspeople do give you some background into what's going on as well, so it's not that bad. So I suppose my point is that if you're coming to the game for a deep story to accompany your combat, you simply won't find one here. And I think that's about it for this section because, frankly, I really don't think there's much to dislike here. So let's move on to the conclusion. In my opinion, Labyrinth Legend is a fast, flashy, and fun action RPG with some great music, solid retro visuals, and truly enjoyable gameplay. As I said earlier, it's not going to set the world on fire, but for the price you're paying, you get an entertaining video game that isn't trying to sell you anything extra. The game feels like it actively wants you to enjoy it, and that, in and of itself, is quite refreshing in 2022. Ultimately, I think this game deserves to be played by as many people as possible, and it was such a pleasant surprise from the very beginning right up to the end. Sadly, with this being a download-only indie release on the Switch, it may get overlooked by a lot of players. I really hope that doesn't happen because despite reviewing this game for free, I would absolutely buy a sealed physical copy for my collection if one existed. This game really is the literal definition of a hidden gem, and I think you should give it a try. So there you go, that's my review of Labyrinth Legend. The official release date for the Nintendo Switch version is January 18th, 2022, and it'll cost you around £13.50 in the UK and $15 in the US. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel, and if you like what I do and want to offer your support, check out the first link in the video description down below. But with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.